the best spell in every FromSoft game when it comes to PvE. And when I say spells, that not only includes sorceries, but also incantations, miracles, hexes, pyromancies. For some reason, people think that when I say spells, it only means magic or sorceries, and I don't really know why. Like, all those categories fall under spells. But yeah, I don't really have much else to say on this intro, so might as well get started. Demon Soul spells are split up into two categories. There's magic and then there's miracles. Miracles kinda suck because they only house a couple of decent support spells and they quite literally only have one damaging spell. Whereas for the magic spell school, which I just want to mention first, in Demon Souls, magic refers to a damage type, a spell type, and a stat, which was very stupid and annoying, so I'm glad that they changed it to sorceries and intelligence. But Demon Souls magic is just broken. They do stupid damage, there is literally no soft cap for them, spells don't consume any stamina, and catalysts don't require upgrading. And the options themselves are all really powerful, from the support-based spells to the buffs, and even the damaging options. The best ones being Homing Soulmass and Firestorm. Soul Ray is also a really solid staple option that you should just be using for every single magic build no matter what, but it's just not going to be that insanely broken damage like Homing Soulmass is. This spell performs better than pretty much every other spell in the entire series, maybe except for a couple, one of those being Firestorm, which I'm going to consider the best spell in the entirety of Demon Souls. It's a fire AoE that pretty much destroys everything that it touches. You can see the gameplay. I didn't think I need to talk about it much, other than the fact that it does consume a lot of MP, so every single time that you use it, you probably have to use some spice directly afterwards, but spice is very cheap in this game, so it's not even that big of a deal. And with it being a fire damaging spell, it's going to be pretty useless in area 2, but that's why you also have spells like Soul Ray and Soul Mass because it complements this spell perfectly. Dark Souls 1 was the game that decided to shift the spell system into having set casts instead of an FP or an MP bar. This was pretty much put in place to make it so the spells are more balanced and it encourages people to use more than just one spell. So with that being said, it's hard to just have one spell be the best when you're supposed to be using multiple, but there still definitely is a best one. Now, Dark Souls 1 has 3 separate spell categories in sorceries, miracles, and pyromancies. Thankfully, with the addition of lightning damage, the miracles actually had more than one damaging spell. It's still the weakest spell type in the game, although things like Sunlight Blade, Darkmoon Blade, and Wrath of the Gods can be pretty ridiculous. But to find our best damaging spell, we're going to have to look towards the sorceries and the pyromancies. And just like in Demon Souls, spells have no stamina cost and there is no need to upgrade a catalyst. Although there are soft caps for spells in this game this time, except for when it comes to the pyromancies, because those actually scale off the level of your pyromancy flame, which requires souls to upgrade. So pyromancies can easily be the most broken thing in this game, because with some soul farming or some other funky methods to get lots of souls, you can easily start one-shotting early game bosses. And if you manage to pick up some Chaos Flame pyromancies, the entire playthrough is just easy mode. But even then, there is one spell in particular that the sorceries have that is just not fair, and that is Dark Bead. This spell is one of a few different dark sorceries that you can find in the DLC, and being that dark damage wasn't a thing until Dark Souls 2, these bad boys did split physical and magic damage, the physical damage scaling of strength and dexterity, and the magic scaling of intelligence. So with the stuff that had a decent strength or dexterity scaling, the dark bead damage was just turned up to 100. You do only get 6 casts with the Dark Bead, but it's not like you really need any more than that just to be able to kill any boss in the game. It does amazing damage at close range, far range, it's good at hitting enemies like to move around, multiple enemies at once, and it has a really quick cast time. Like, there is basically no flaw with this spell outside of the fact that you get it all the way in the DLC. So yeah, until then you gotta settle for your Soul Arrows, Soul Spears, and Homing Soul Mass, which are still all very amazing spells. Dark Souls 2 was the hardest game to decide which spell is the best, due to the spells being nowhere near as broken as the previous games, because not only did they double down into having the limited spell casting system, but the bosses at the later part of the game are very elemental resist, especially in the DLC. They also decided to have the catalysts now be upgraded and infused just to be able to get good damage, and the spells also now consume stamina. Now, another thing that Dark Souls 2 did was add an additional damage type and spell type. So in this game we have sorceries, miracles, pyromancies, and hexes, all of which scaling off either int or faith, and they're all pretty much equally as viable. Pyromancies might be the weakest of the bunch, But being that they synergize with either Int or Faith, it makes them useful. And even without an Int or Faith build, being that they don't have any requirements, you could just use things like Warmth, Poison Mist, Toxic Mist with any build in the game. And yes, Forbidden Sun is a great spell, but not really for PvE, because only having one cast at base level is just diabolical. When it comes to the miracles, they have the potential to be the best spell type in the game if it wasn't for them being nerfed to their spell uses. Only getting a couple of lightning spear casts is ridiculous, and if something like Sunlight Spear just had a bit more casts, it would easily be the best spell in the entire game. So as long as you do stack up on Sunlight Spears, or use some other types of funny methods to get lots of spell casts, then I genuinely think that Sunlight Spear is the best spell in the entire game. But I think for the most consistent and best damaging spells, they're going to go to either the sorceries or the hexes. They all get respectable amount of spell uses, decent cast time. Soul Geyser is an amazing sorcery option, although that one is a bit more situational to larger bosses. I think the best sorceries would be Soul Spear or Crystal Soul Spear. They hit really hard, they go far, they can go through enemies. They're just really good. Now they do only get a couple of spell uses, however, you can actually farm these with bonfire aesthetics. So equipping multiple Soul Spears can net you many more casts, and it can make it extremely viable throughout an entire playthrough, even in the DLC. And that's especially true if you have things like Unleash Magic as well. Now, as reliable as the sorceries are and how good Crystal Soul Spear can be, they're probably still not going to beat out hexes based on performance. From start to finish, they're just all great. Like, the only downside of the hexes is that they're just really inconvenient to try and build around. So many of them have higher requirements, take up multiple spell slots, and the hexes are also split up into two subcategories for the staves and the chimes. And also these chime-based spells consume souls every single time that you use them. Now, thankfully, the damage trade-off is well worth it, and combined with how dark scaling works in this game, it makes them be probably the best spells to use at higher levels. I think the most consistent one is Great Resonance Soul, even though it doesn't really do as much damage as Climax. Climax drains all of your souls every single time that you use it, so it's just not as reliable. But despite all that, my pick for the best spell in the game is going to go to Dark Orb. It's not a chime-based hex, it's just a basic single target projectile that does mid damage, but the thing is, you get a minimum of 20 casts, and you can get multiple copies also very early on. So you can easily be walking around with 90 casts of Dark Orb, just sit at a distance where nothing is going to hit you, and just keep spamming away. The best staff for hexes is available early on in the game, and it's just easy to use. It's not going to be the most broken spell, but none of the Dark Souls 2 spells are broken, so I might as well just go with the most reliable and consistent one. Dark Souls 3 turned away from the limited spell usage system and returned to the FP system. I guess this was like a change to make the game more accessible and give more freedom to the player. I'll probably make a video at some points comparing the two systems and going over the pros and cons. But the Dark Souls 3 spells tend to get a lot of slack about them being too weak, which is partially true. The spells are like weaker in their base form, but Dark Souls 3 balanced them out due to you being able to regenerate your FP reliably, and also just adding a lot more buffs in this game to boost the spell damage. But the thing is, the buffs to actually help boost the damage, like the rings, are pretty much required for you to be able to do good damage, which is probably why the Elden Ring equivalents weren't made as good. But on top of that, you also need to have a pure faith build or an pure intelligence build just for them to work, which most people are out here running strength, dexterity, or even just hybrid builds where the spells aren't going to do well at all. And it's all because the infusion system had it be to where you're sacrificing a lot of weapon damage just to get good spell damage. So Dark Souls 3 spells are actually really powerful, and in fact, they can be way more powerful than Dark Souls 2 spells, but the weapons are just too good in this game that it's hard to justify going into the spells. I just don't know why we couldn't be able to buff infusible weapons. But when it comes to the best spells in Dark Souls 3, you can find them in any of the 3 spell types. Yes, they did take away the hexes, but they kind of just merged them in with the sorceries. Like, they're still there and they require a different build, but technically they're sorceries. But they're also probably the weakest of the bunch due to almost all of them not being that good, and the things that it requires for them to do good damage are all in the DLC, including their best spell and Great Soul Dregs. The rest of the sorceries are perfectly fine. Soul Spear and Crystal Soul Spear are amazing options. Soul Stream is actually a pretty good option as well if you do find the opening for it. Pestilent Mist is good against these larger HP bosses. So the spell type itself is super consistent, but there really isn't anything too amazing. The miracles in Dark Souls 3 get so much unnecessary hate in this game despite being such a goated spell type. Now, yes, it does suck for like the first 30% of the game. There is basically nothing of value when it comes to the miracles, and also the lightning infusion is so late into the game too, so it makes sense why people hate miracle builds, but man, can they be powerful. For one, lightning is the best elemental damage type in the game. Two, they house some amazing support-based spells. And 3, the damage options in Lightning Stake and Sunlight Spear are as good as any spell in the entire game. Even Dory's Gnawing is a really good spell. But the most important thing is that you have a weapon in the Rose of Ariandel that has its weapon art boost miracle damage by 25% for 2 minutes, which is just insane. This one buff alone pretty much makes Sunlight Spear be the best spell in the entire game. Like, it's just dumb as to how much damage it can do. Now, unfortunately, it's only going to do this really good damage at close range, and it is going to require you killing the final boss just to be able to get it, as well as cost 48 FP with every cast. So if you are at really high levels, then I consider Sunlight Spear to be the best spell in the entire game, but I can't give it that title because that's going to end up going to Chaos Bed Vestiges. Pretty much the only Pyromancy worth using because the rest are just mid. Actually, with the exception of Boulder Heave, that shit is actually broken against certain bosses, and it'll even do better than this spell does. But the reason why it's so good is because it does insane damage, it has a larger hitbox, and it travels quickly in a straight line for not that much FP compared to some other harder hitting spells. Yes, Great Chaos Fireball can do more damage for about the same FP cost, but it's not anywhere near as easy to use, which is what makes Chaos Bed Vestiges be that amazing spell that people love. The tools are Bloodborne's equivalent of spells, except they weren't anywhere near as fleshed out as a concept compared to spells in the Souls games. Like, they're honestly more in line with like throwable objects that have scalings like a firebomb than they are compared to spells. Like, these things are equipped like a regular item, you use them like a regular item, they require bullets to use and not their own resource, and they also lack variety. There's only one tool that scales of Blood Tinge, and it doesn't even do Blood Tinge damage. There's only one bolt damaging tool, and for some reason, there isn't even a singular fire damaging tool. Like, all these tools are pretty much arcane scaling and arcane damaging projectiles, most being single targets. Like, there's a very severe lack of AoE tools in the game too, and it doesn't help that the only reliable arcane weapon to get that's actually decent without having to bend over backwards is the Moonlight Greatsword, and that weapon already has projectiles that cost bullets. So it's to the point that most people that use the tools only end up going into about 15 arcane and use some support-based ones, which things like the Old Hunter's Bone and the Empty Phantasm Shell can be very useful. Now, despite the tools not being as integrated as an important mechanic as I would have hoped for, there still are going to be some very good damaging tools out there, because very similar to the Demon Souls spells, the tools don't actually have a soft cap. You can just go all into arcane and output very high damage, unless you're fighting one of those many arcane resist bosses. And then in that case, you're subjected to using the Tiny Tonitrus, which can be pretty decent, but it might be a bit too expensive for the amount of damage it can do consistently. But when it does come to the best arcane tools, honestly, you can go any which way. The Executioner's Gloves are really easy to use due to their really good tracking, although it can be a bit on the expensive side. Accursed Brew is a bit harder to use, but it's way more efficient. Black Sky Eye is kind of like a nice in-between. It's going to be very easy to use, not going to output that much damage, but it's a nice cheap way to pick off some trash mobs. But then you have a spell in a Call Beyond that can just serve as an absolute boss melting machine. It is going to be incredibly expensive, but this shit definitely puts in work. But honestly, I'm going to give it the best spell award to the Augur of Abritus. This tool is extremely versatile and the best tool in a lot of different situations. Any smaller enemy just gets completely stun-locked and cheesed by this due to its insane knockback, and it also has the ability to parry and backstab enemies, and it does all this while only consuming one bullet and outputting more damage than some of these other really expensive projectile options. Now, obviously, it's not going to be anywhere near as easy to use as these projectiles, but in a game where everything is super aggressive and has little to no poise, this has been the most useful tool for me in every playthrough. The Elden Ring spell system returned to its original Demon Souls form by only having 2 spell types as well as costing FP. Now, unlike in Demon Souls, there's lots of spells, and both spell types are not only viable, but also kind of broken. Like, with all the buffs you can get in this game, you can turn even the average spell into a deadly weapon. Now, I'm not going to break down the spells thoroughly for obvious reasons. If you do want to see that, I have dedicated videos. But when it does come to which spell type is the best, I would favor the incantations more so, being that they house more variety in damage type, and they also just have better support based spells in the heals and buffs, and they also have much more accessible catalysts. Like compared to the staves, the seals are way easier to come by, have lower requirements, weigh a lot less, while having the best somber seals be accessible very early on too. And combined with how much easier it is to find buffs for these incantations, it just makes them better. But with that being said, the sorceries do have some things that they do very well. One, sorceries typically have more freedom of movement, like you can strafe with almost every projectile, and you can chain cast the sorceries unlike with the incantations. They also get access to frost more reliably, which is probably the best status effect to get on a spell. The sorceries typically gets better tracking, and the damaging options are just better on average compared to your incantations. But we're not here to talk about the average spells, we're here to talk about the best spells. And some of the best spells are actually in the DLC, and the DLC kind of much more favored the incantations. Knight's Lightning Spear is one of the best single target projectiles in the entire game. If somebody were to say that this is the best spell in the entire game period, I wouldn't even argue it. Like, that's how good this thing is. Enemies don't dodge it, does high damage and high stance damage. Rotten Butterflies is another spell that should just be on every single faith build that you have, because in just one cast, it can do over 30% of a boss's health bar. And then you have a spell in Pest Thread Spears, which can just destroy any single boss that's even the slightest bit large. Now, some sorceries in the DLC were nothing to slouch at. Fleeting Microcosm is probably the best ranged AoE in the game. Rings of Spectral Light is one of the best snipers, just not as good as Frenzied Burst. And also, Glintstone Nails is as good as any single target projectile, except for when it comes to Knight's Comet, which stands alone as the best sorcery in the entire game, with its ease of use and DPS potential. I think sorceries have the best single target projectile as some of the best close range spells. Things like Zamor Ice Storm, Ardula's Moonblade, Carrion Piercer, they're all amazing. But obviously, Carrion Slicer is the best in that category. Of all those like quick melee range spells, yes, even better than Catch Flame, which is the best close range incantation, but the reason why I consider Slicer better is because it has lower FP cost, more range, synergy with the multi-hit talismans, and has a staff to boost it. But when it does come to the best spell in the entire game, it's not going to go to any sorcery, nor to any DLC incantation. It's going to go to the base game incantation that is Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike. This spell destroys basically everything. It is more consistent against larger bosses, but even smaller ones you can mess them up too. All you need is to charge this thing up for a second, which might seem like it's a hard task, but trust me, every single boss does give you an opening long enough, even if you don't use spirit summons. But the spell also does do the best elemental damage type in lightning damage, and there's also so many things that can help boost the damage of this spell, it's ridiculous. Like, I don't think I need to talk about it any longer, this spell is just broken. Except for when it comes to Elden Ring Nightreign. A lot of spells that dominate regular Elden Ring just don't do it the same in this game. Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike got nerfed pretty heavily. Knight's Comet is a decent spell in this game, but it was mainly good in Elden Ring due to its 30% damage boost it got off the Staff of Loss and how many bosses it like to dodge and move around, and it also just loses out on a bunch of DPS potential in this game due to the stamina cost being so high. Like, all these sorceries that can be chain casted isn't as big as a positive in Nightreign when you can only cast it like 2 times before running out of stamina. Now, despite the Nightreign spells not performing as well as they do in Elden Ring, they're still going to be very dominant. And in fact, you can actually argue that Nightreign spells are more dominant, because they can consistently outperform weapons by a lot, and especially when it comes to the new game mode. Because for some reason, they decided to make all the best damage boosting relic perks be catered towards the spellcasters, and you can also have some of these perks roll on the exact same relic too. And with some like decent RNG in a pretty good build, there is going to be no weapon that's going to be out-damaging certain types of spell build. But even though the spells are the exact same across the games, the meta is still going to be a bit different. And as of right now at least, there are no DLC spells in this game. Like, I have no doubts that if Knight's Lightning Spear was added to Nightreign, it'd probably be the best incantation by far, because the incants in their current state are kind of just lacking. Like, Catch Flame is still great, but in this game, the spell's potential rely heavily on the spell boosting relics, which Catch Flame does not have. Other really good incantations like Lightning Spear, Flame of Frenzy, Flamefall Upon Them, Burno Flame, like, they're all really great, but they're pretty much just as good as they are in regular Elden Ring. Like, they're S tier spells, but like, they're not broken. I think Burno Flame is probably the best incantation in this game, because this one didn't get nerfed unlike Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike did. But I would never consider putting Burno Flame at the top of a spell list because this game has certain spells that are guaranteed to come with seals, but a majority of them don't. So the chances of finding this spell are slim to none. And that's not even taken into consideration all the different bosses that you have to fight that might be resist to fire. In Elden Ring, the incantations having this different variety of damage types is really good because you can guarantee the spells. But in this game, I honestly kind of prefer the sorceries because magic damage is very neutral. You don't really know what's going to be around the corner, so always having magic damage is never a bad bet. Like, not many things are weaker to magic damage, but not many things resist it either. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, the average sorcery just performs better than the average incantation, so with the RNG nature of this game, it just makes them be better. And when it comes to the best sorceries, it's gonna come down to Carrion Slicer and Shattering Crystal. Not only because they're guaranteed to come on certain staves, but because even based on their performance, they're just straight up goated. Carrion Slicer is basically just as good as it is in Elden Ring, but arguably even better due to how much more FP efficient spells are valued. Its synergy with the multi-hit talismans also has it extend to the successive attacks negate damage buff. You can stack up in multiple Carrion Sword sorcery relics to further enhance the damage, and it synergizes perfectly with the best spellcasting character, which is another aspect of this game I didn't touch on. Like, the intelligent spellcasters are just better, and the Duchess is probably the best amongst them due to her faster spellcasting speed and skill in restage that just makes her just be the highest damaging one. And being that her dodge is fine-tuned for this close-range combat, Carrion Slicer is best paired with her, and I think it's the best spell, mainly in solo play, because when it comes to teams, I think Shattering Crystal is better, and that's going to be what I consider the best spell in the entire game too, because the reasons why I value Slicer more for solo is because it's cheaper and faster. But in trios or in duos, your team can not only drop you Starlight Shards, but they can take aggro. And with how many charged sorcery buffs that you can find along your way, you can just sit at a slightly safer distance and just keep spamming Shattering Crystal. It's not going to be that long of a projectile attack. It's not going to be as easy to use as things like Stars of Ruin or Knight's Comet. So if you really wanted to play it safe, those spells might even be better, but the damage of Shattering Crystal is just second to none. I don't know what they did to this spell, but it went from like an A tier option in regular Elden Ring to a high S tier borderline broken option. And it's to the point where this thing might honestly end up getting nerfed. And it's kind of funny that they actually made this thing be guaranteed on not just one staff, but 2 separate staves. And it's a blue rarity staff, so it's a very decent chance that you find it as well. Okay, but that is us now done and completed with that one. As always, let me know what your opinions are down in the comments below. And please do like and subscribe because I do have some more Soulsborne and some more Nightreign related content coming out along the way. So if that does interest you, please show some support and I'll catch you guys in the next. See yous.